Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here for our Smart Women, Smart Power event. I'm Kathleen Hicks. I direct the International Security Program here at CSIS, and I also lead the Smart Women, Smart Power initiative. Our regular moderator, Nina Easton, has the morning off, so you get me today. So we thank those of you who are here in the room. Of course, we also have an audience online, and so we appreciate all of you joining. We're very pleased to welcome author and activist Manal Al-Sharif for what we know will be a great conversation today about women's rights, challenges, and opportunities in the world, and certainly in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. Her new book, Daring to Drive, which is available outside as well, A Saudi Women's Awakening, has just come out. It chronicles her life in the kingdom up to the point in 2011 when she got in that car and filmed it and with her brother, and also follows the aftermath of what happened. We're going to talk more about Manal's story in a moment, but I just want to remind you on the social media items that you should be following us on Twitter. We're at Smart Women. You should follow Manal at Manal_Al-Sharif, one word. And be sure to check out our Smart Women podcast and iTunes University course. If you're live tweeting, and we do hope that you are, you should be using the hashtags hashtag CSIS Live and hashtag Daring2Drive. We also have some safety announcements. We have exits in the front of the building, exits behind me. Just follow me should a fire alarm or anything like that go off. Also, before we begin, I do want to thank our sponsors, most importantly, Citi, who makes Smart Women, Smart Power possible. Thank you for helping us to amplify the voices of women in foreign policy, national security, and international business. Citi's support has helped us to spotlight women who are trailblazers and thought leaders, and no one fulfills that more than our guest today, Manal Al-Sharif. Her efforts to promote women's rights in Saudi Arabia and the Middle East have been recognized globally. She's the recipient of the Vaclav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent. In 2012, Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. She has received many other awards, but we would take the entire hour going through them if I started to list them. So I think what we should do instead is dive a little bit into your story, Manal, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. What a beautiful city, beautiful weather. My name is Manal Al-Sharif. I'm 38 years old. I'm not supposed to say my age. I'm a computer engineer and a mother of two and a minor. That's my life story.
Well, let me just, that's a great place to start, because I think a lot of people might start at 2011, right, and go forward. And I'd love to go back and start sort of with your upbringing. You don't fit the profile in your upbringing of someone who grew up in a wealthy, privileged environment who is sort of using her extra time to express dissent. Instead, you come from very humble beginnings. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood growing up in Saudi Arabia and what your experience was like as a girl in particular at that time?
Yes, so I'm born in 79. That's a very important year if anyone who reads history, where it's the year of trouble, where Saudi Arabia had an uprising of the Sunni Islamist jihadis, where they went and they sieged the Holy Mosque, which is the holiest shrine for Muslims in the world. And at the same time, it was the uprising of the Shia Islam in Iran with the revolution in 79. So you have a trauma happening in Saudi Arabia, and then uprising of Shia Islam in Iran. That year, the king had to sit with the ulama, and ask how to prevent another uprising. The uprising finished. They had to finish it in a very, I would say, violent way, where they had, in Mecca, you cannot use weapons, you cannot use even guns in Mecca, or war. You cannot start a war in Mecca. It's a holy city. They had to use military equipment to end the siege. So the king was traumatized, and he asked the ulama, what should we do to stop this from happening again? Saudi Arabia was a very young country at that time. We had our third king, King Khalid. And the ulama said, the jihadis, the uprising was because of all the modernization the country it's been introduced to the country. Women presenters on TV, you have the cinemas, you have all these, I would say, loose when it comes to the right Islamic morals according to their interpretation of the Sharia law, you should listen to those jihadis because you will provoke them if you continue doing what you're doing. So the country that was going forward had to go backward. Exactly, by the way, happened in Iran when they had to go backward. So that's the era that shaped my generation. So the 80s and the 90s, we were brought up in an era where the Grand Mufti himself was the head of the women education. So we have the Grand Mufti and and the ulama are responsible for writing the curriculums for women's schools. We had more, all the strict laws, all the strict rules, those jihadis who did the siege of Mecca, being implemented. So they killed them, they executed all the jihadis, but they adopted that ideology. And that's the story of my generation. I'll talk through my story. So I was brought up in a very conservative city, which is Mecca, where women have to cover, where you can't leave the house. You're not allowed to work in public. You're not allowed to do a lot of things all around the kingdom. One of them only is driving. And that year also in the 70s, I think it was also the same year, where they imposed that women cannot leave the country without the permission of her legal guardian. So the country went backward, and we have this preaching, this rhetoric of the ideology of the hate of the others are the conspiring to bring down Islam. So this is the atmosphere we grow up in. And that radicalized a lot of people. Some people were immune, which is amazing. When I sat with my girlfriend, they said, we were immune. They tell us, don't listen to music, and I just go and hide and would listen to music. Some people like me were radicalized. So we did believe that these are haram, I'm not gonna listen to music, or I'm not gonna, I used to draw, I would burn all my drawing, I would burn my brother's cassettes if he listened to music. We were brought up to believe that if you see sin, you can go and you have to go and change it using action or words. So the 90s also and the 80s came with the Afghan war. And a lot of the youth were encouraged to join the holy war against the infidels in Afghanistan. So a lot of youth, a lot of my generation went for the jihad in Afghanistan, went for the jihad in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which happened in the 90s. There was also the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at that time. So there was this, I would say, boiling for my generation, that Islam is under attack and we have to protect it. And the only way to protect it is to be devout Muslims. Mm-hmm. That was my generation growing up.
And devout Muslims, in your case and in many others' case, in a very fundamentalist interpretation of what that meant. You have a story in the book about, which I'd love for you to share with the audience, about your two stories actually. One about you burning, as you point out, you sort of gathered everything in your family and burned it on the roof. So it'd be great to have you sort of talk about that during the phase in which you felt those things were haram. And there's also the story of your sister and a friend, I think it was, pulling off your veil and so I'd love to have you kind of relay those stories. So growing up in a very conservative city, Mecca, I had my teachers, they would cover up. I was 4th grade, and I wanted to be like my teachers because we look up to them. And I just go to my mom and I say, today I was 10 years old, I decided to wear the niqab and the gloves and the black socks when I got to school today. Mom thought I'm just bluffing. She thought it's like, impersonating someone, like a custom or something. Yeah. So she bought it for me, and my sister was laughing at me. That's the funny thing. My sister, she was immune. And the next day I felt so big walking to the school with my niqab. But when I came back, Saudi Arabia is really hot. So if you think 95 that you faced yesterday is hot, wait till you go to Saudi Arabia. It goes to 110, that's the normal days. So I was walking back to home, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. There was something wrong here, but I didn't want to tell Mom that I want to remove the niqab. My teachers were happy for me. And,
So I kept it. One day we were walking to my cousin's, my uncle's house, which is across the street, and my sister and my cousin were walking in front of me. They both didn't cover. They're older than me, 2 years and 1 year older than me. They were conspiring. They were walking alone. They ran back. They pulled my niqab in the street, and they ran with the niqab. I felt so embarrassed, but I felt also relieved that I'm like, I would blame it on my sister and my cousin that I'm not wearing the niqab. But the change happened when I was first grade in middle school. You call it here intermediate school. I was 12 years old, and it was by law that all girls have to cover the face to be able to go to the school. It was by law. So I had to put on the abaya on top of my head, and they would monitor your adherence to the modest Islamic clothes in the street, when we go to the schools. So it wasn't a choice, really, in middle school and in high school.
Yeah, and then you also have this story sort of during that same period in that older middle school or intermediate school era, where you collected the things in your household.
So there was really very extensive preaching happening in Saudi Arabia. We would be most of the things we study in school, it was religious, and it was really the hardcore Islam. And they would tell us that listening to music is haram, that you cannot draw animated objects, and you have to change. So I would go to the house, and I would have to take anything I heard in the school, and from the cassettes, it was freely giving. I was one of the people who give away these cassettes and leaflets that preach this ideology. I go home, and Mom, she would collect these magazines. Saudi Arabia before, because after the 79, women are not allowed to show their face in newspaper, printed newspaper. So when we receive the magazines from outside, there is actually a guy in the custom with a black marker who go through all the women's faces. So the magazine arrived to Saudi Arabia, the women's faces are gone. Yes, but it happened even recently. A few years ago, IKEA catalog that comes to Saudi Arabia has no woman in it. And it was brought up. You can just Google it. It was brought up. So there is still this hiding the woman face. So at that time, Mom, she had this magazine that which she smuggled from Egypt. I collected everything with my brother cassettes, and I went upstairs on the rooftop of our apartment building, and I burned everything because that's how you obey God. That's how I'm going to save my family from hellfire, from these sins. And that's not my story, by the way. There were youth who going, we had some shops that sell cassettes, music cassettes. They would go in Qasim area. They went and they burned the cassette shop. Mm-hmm. So these things, for example, the satellite dish was banned in the 90s when it came. It was banned by the Ministry of Interior. There was a law, not a law actually, it was a statement, they banned it. So you cannot have a satellite dish in your house. They would go in Qasim, they would have the shooting gun, and they would shoot them if they see anyone with the extremist. They would go and shoot it. Mm. So it was the radicalization of the youth and their really, I would say, enthusiasm to be good and devout Muslims, that you go and interfere in other people's faith and question their faith.
Right. And so what started to change that in you? You mentioned your sister was immune, to use your word. You were not, but that changed over time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the immune thing is momentarily, because my sister, she covered her face in college, and I remember my colleagues coming back to me who knows her. Oh my God, thank God she's covering her face finally. I'm like, wow, they even monitored her. There were some people immune. What was the question about that?
Just in terms of what changed for you from moving from a sense that this was in fact the way you wanted to live your life to.
So you live in the state, you're 50 states, right? Are all states like New York and Washington, for example, or Massachusetts, you call them the liberal states, and you have the conservative states, right? What we see in Saudi Arabia is only the liberal state, only the New York and Massachusetts. But we're very less aware about the conservative states that you have here. Imagine Saudi Arabia the same, because we're a huge country. You can bring Texas, which is the largest in the continent. You can fit 3 Texas in Saudi Arabia. This is how huge my country. So each part of the country is less conservative or more liberal. So Jeddah, which is only 80 kilos away, you do the math with the miles, is more liberal than Mecca. Only 80 kilos between us. I studied in Jeddah, thankfully. I studied in Jeddah.
For
and
college?
That was for college, yes. I went to computer science, and it was a battle, actually, to go to Jeddah, because I was thinking, oh my God, they're liberal, they have corrupt Islam. It was very thrown out that for a girl to go and study in Jeddah, because they're different than us in Mecca. And it's the same country, by the way. But that was the first test to my beliefs and the things. I had girlfriends that I studied with. They were amazing people. We do the prayers together. They collect sadaqah to give, which is like charity money, to give to the lady who works there. And then when we leave the university, we have different campuses, by the way, girls and boys, we never mix. So inside, we don't wear the hijab. And I was waiting for my father to pick me up, and I see her, the same lady, the same girl, she uncovered her face. That really, I didn't talk to her for a whole semester. She didn't understand why, we were friends. But that really shook my belief. I was always thinking, I'm gonna talk to her to cover her face, I'm gonna talk to her. But it's interesting, Sarah didn't, her name was Sarah. Sarah didn't change, I changed when I was in the university. Let me tell you something else about my university. So computer science, we didn't have that many professors, female professors. So we would go to classes and listen to the lecture through a closed circuit TV, not because our teacher was in America. Our teacher was in the other campus. It just we couldn't talk to our teacher because he was a man.
So the male students and the teacher were in one room.
Yes.
You were with a
separate
female
campus.
monitor. Were in
Yes.
another.
We couldn't even talk to him.
Right.
She would, if we have a question, we write it down for her, and she picks up the phone and she talks to him. So this is how much the separation between the
and
boys
you also
girls.
mentioned sometimes the connection went down, so
Oh my
then
God.
you just missed the
We'll
lecture.
just be sitting down there, waiting for the teacher to bring us copy from his lecture. Yes.
So you were a great student your whole life. Part of that, it sounds like, is your mother. Can you talk a little bit about your mother, who's not Saudi by birth? And the idea of education that comes across as a very powerful theme from her.
One of the most amazing things about Saudi Arabia, which I hope America follows, education is free for all. My university is one of the best universities in the Arab world. It's number 5, and I didn't pay for my education. I studied computer science. We have 100-something thousand, I think 120,000 students studying abroad. Most of them are here in the States, doing their PhD, master's, and even bachelor degree. That investment in education, so even if you come from a poor family, you don't have to pay for your education. You can bring up your family out of poverty because you are giving a free chance to study and get a job and move away from poverty. And my mom, she really believed in education. We were 3 kids, 2 girls and 1 boy. My sister is MD. She's the first MD in the whole family. It was totally against because she would study, men would teach her because you cannot go to an anatomy class through the TV.
Right.
It was the only one that was allowed.
The only field.
The only field that was allowed the professor will be in the same room with the students. And so it was huge for scientists for a girl to go there. She did it and she became MD. My brother is a he always, when I say you're a geologist, he says, I'm not a geologist. Petroleum geoscientist, something like this, yes. And I'm computer science. I owe it all really to my mom. My mom believed deeply in education and getting the best grades because she was deprived from education herself. And I think it's very important that you have your mom or your family believe in education because it is liberating. It is what could really change your life is education.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you come out of college, you get a great job at Aramco.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, yep.
We get paid to go to college, by the way.
Right.
Yes.
You come out of college, you go to Aramco. I believe I have the timing right that 9/11 happened somewhere in there, and that seemed to have an influence on you. How did you perceive the 9/11 experience, given where you were in your own journey?
At that time, I still believed in the jihadis. I still believed in there is a conspiracy against Islam. I still believed that we have to use power against power. But when September 11 happened, I was still in college at that time. And because of college and because of the education and because of the internet was really the first window for us to the outside world in a country where everything is heavily censored. I remember September 11 was a turning point not only in my life, but in the life of the Saudis. because we had this hate against America, and they are the reason behind all problems. But when we saw civilians being killed, and the ones who were responsible were those jihadis that we believe they were our heroes, that was a turning point in the life of so many Saudis that day, the September 11th.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously, you know, you jump through your period of working. Talk a little bit about your experience as a working woman in Saudi Arabia, but also specifically in your case in a slightly different kind of culture, more than slightly different kind of culture at Aramco. And maybe kind of take us all the way up to that 2011 period.
Yes. So I studied computer science. 2000. I joined in '98. There were no jobs for me. If I graduate in 5 years, there will be no jobs. The only jobs I would have, I would work in an institute with a college degree. And I remember one of my girlfriends, she looked at me and she said, so when you graduate, do you think you're going to find a job? Like the maximum, you will be a lecturer in an institute with a 4,000 riyal, which is around $1,000. We were 200 ladies who were accepted in computer science. 60 of us made it, class 2002. 2 of us found jobs. So that tells you when you have all this education but you don't have jobs. That was really 2002. Luckily, I worked in Aramco because Aramco was the only, at that time, was the only company that allows men and women to work in the same workspace. The laws in Aramco, let me just explain to you what is Aramco. Aramco started by Americans in the 30s. They had the US government, they had agreement with the Saudi government. The word is concession?
A concession?
Concession agreement
Yes.
To explore Saudi lands for oil. And they had, because there was no infrastructure in the eastern province where they found the oil, they built a whole community, a gated community. And this community, it was very autonomous. They had their own schools, their own hospitals, their own even fire department, their own cinemas. They had cinemas. They even had their ice factory. And it was totally isolated. But in the 80s, the government bought all the shares of this company, and it became fully owned by the Saudi government. So they continued hiring women. By law,
that was part of the agreement of the sale.
Yes, that they continue hiring women. We were really 0.08 when I joined in 2002, Aramco. Things are changing now, thankfully. But when I joined Aramco, I was working illegally because, how illegally? Because the Saudi government law says women and men cannot work in the same workplace. While I'm working in Aramco, my whole team, 38 employees were men. I was the only woman there, so that was illegal. But that was, when I moved to Aramco, the laws outside the gate were totally different than inside. Everything, I remember when the driver drove us from the airport through the gate. I was a summer student at the time when I first joined. We just crossed the gate and everything changed. It looked like a Southern California city. I swear to God, I was driving in Los Angeles, I'm like, it looks so much like Dhahran. Dhahran is the headquarters of Aramco. And I found women driving there, women walking without abaya, walking their dogs. Some of them are on bikes. And I was like, what is going on here? I said, did you take me out of Saudi? He said, no, we're still in Saudi. So that was the first shock, but the shocks continued as I was working there, where I could drive my car, I could work with other men, I could lead projects. But the problem was when you leave the camp. So as a computer engineer, I was in information security. It was newly formulated division. We had to get training for information security because I graduated computer science. So all the team would go to the city to attend the training, and I would be left behind. And I would complain, and they say, why? And they say, because we need a special permission for you, because you're a woman, to attend the classes, because they're not allowed to mix the men and women. I would take the books from them when they come back, and I would study, and I would pass the same certificates. One certificate was the ethical hacking. I needed to get the title, Information Security Consultant. Yes. You need to study this certificate in a lab. You need lab, it's a hands-on. It's not something you read. And I insisted, I went to him and I said, I want to take this. He said, we can't. Everyone got it, and I didn't. I told him, send me abroad. And he said, it's too expensive to send you abroad. So I continued. When I'm after something, I never stop until I get it. They had to bring the teacher. I had to find a room. It's only me and the teacher. That was the best class I had in my life. I had the full attention of my teacher. We had 2 laptops and a tiny projector. 5 days like this, from 7 to 4 p.m. And I got the certificate, and I got the first title. I was the youngest to get this title. You're an IT. I told him I'm the first Saudi woman to get the CISSP, which is the highest for any information security professional. And I remember I had to drive all the way to Riyadh, 4 hours from my city. And I was alone, I remember. I was alone in the room. Everyone were men. I was next to the door. They had to bring a partition around me. I can cheat all I want if I want it. They had to bring a partition around me, and I was doing the exam alone. And all my colleagues who attended the exam, they failed. And I made it. I succeeded in that exam. This was how difficult it was. When I was working in Aramco, there were so many difficult things. Like, for example, as a Saudi woman, I couldn't live in the compound. And outside, the government wouldn't allow me to rent a room, wouldn't allow me to rent an apartment without mahram. And I was like, oh my God, I'm employed but homeless. That was the first shock to me, that I couldn't stay in the compound. Like, if you're a woman, any woman, non-Saudi woman, you can stay in the compound if you're an employee. But if you're a Saudi woman, Saudi men could stay in the compound. I couldn't. So that was one of the biggest challenges to me, the contradiction when they treated me. They gave me a job, but at the same time, there was so much contradiction that how I was treated just being a woman. It goes on. I couldn't use, when we had to find an apartment in the city through a friend. Her dad had to come, had to go to the police, sign a consent that his daughters, 2 daughters, we lied.
Because you needed a guardian to sign that.
He had to sign. I couldn't talk to my family because Dad will say, if you want to live in the city, you go back to Mecca. It's a long story. You will go through all the complication in my employed and homeless chapter. We had to leave a man's shoes outside our apartment just to prove that there is a man living with us in the apartment. This is how complicated it was. But Aramco had a city bus that picks the employees from the city, takes them to the compound where they work, because we had our offices there. And the bus passed by our house. And it was 6 a.m., we're ready to go to our job. Our job starts at 7. We go out, me and Lemia, my flatmate, and we, with so much confidence, the bus stops. There was a man standing next to us. He was our neighbor. And we go with the man to the bus, and the driver, he says, no woman. And we're like, what? We're Aramco employees, and we show him our badges, and he says, women are not allowed in this bus. So now, you're giving me a job, and you cut my hands and my legs and make all the rules impossible for me to succeed.
So that brings, and
that was the contradiction.
In the midst of that as well, just to kind of link this in time with other events in the world, of course, the Arab Spring is occurring in the later part of this.
Yes.
And you are experiencing, there are multiple times in the book where very specific instances where the inability to drive or to transport yourself becomes a very significant obstacle. Yes. So what brought you out, if you will, into an activist role in this movement about women 2011. To drive?
I call myself, they call me activist. She introduced me as an activist. I call myself an accidental activist. I never stop. When I see something wrong, I speak against it. In Aramco, I had my own Facebook group where we speak against all the discriminative laws. Things are changing dramatically, thankfully, in Aramco as more and more women join the workforce there and in the country. But I've always, when I've seen something wrong, I've always spoke against it. I had the guts. They called me a troublemaker. They said, you're going to lose your job. You're going to be excluded from promotions because you speak up. I'm like, I'm very respectful. And they say, respect the law. I'm like, I respect it if it respects me. So the 2011, it was a gradual, I was accumulating really, all these frustrations just because I'm a woman. Sometimes I hated that I was a woman in Saudi Arabia. All these frustrations because of a woman, one major one was really driving. Imagine that you need to go to your job and you live in a city with no tram, with no metro, with no train, with no good, reliable taxi companies. like Uber or private companies. Imagine you cannot walk in the street because you don't have pedestrian city. Imagine how you're going to go to the grocery store or drop your kids to the school or go to your job or do basic things. How are we going to do that? We need to hire a driver, a private driver. We buy a car, we hire a private driver because the private drivers get paid so low salaries, around $500. So the men, the Saudi men, wouldn't take these jobs. So we have to bring them from another country. And it's around 1 million drivers in Saudi Arabia, with 9 million women. 1 million driver driving us. He has to live with you in the house. He doesn't speak Arabic. You have to teach him Arabic. He doesn't know anything about the rules in Saudi Arabia. I had to bring a driver and teach him how to drive because he doesn't know how to drive. So all these obstacles were accumulating. I got married and I got divorced and I had my car. I was paying the installments for 4 years. And I came to the US in 2009. Aramco sent me on an exchange program where I gained my driver's license in New Hampshire at the age of 30. Now you know my age. I said my age. At the age of 30, I got my driver's license. And when I went back to Saudi Arabia, I was living in camp. In 2007, the rule changed. Out of policy, Saudi women can live in camp. But still, until this day, it's out of policy. One day I was in the city for my clinic. And I needed a car to take me back home in the camp. And it was 9 p.m., the clinic closed, and I couldn't find a car to drive me back home. We have a list, long list of drivers. I called everyone. I called my brother. I called my colleagues. So when you don't have taxis or drivers, you have to depend on any man in your life. Any man in your life becomes automatically your driver. You can ask him to drive you. That night, I couldn't find anyone. And I walked back home, and I almost got kidnapped because one car followed me, and I was so mad. I threw a rock in this car, but it was so humiliating. I was 32, a mother, I have a car, I have a driver license. Why have to go through this humiliation every day? That was the straw that broke the camel's back, really. That year was 2011 when we saw how the Arab Spring is happening and how the youth, young people, use social media to push for social change. And that sparked the idea that we can do the same, push for social change using social media. One of my colleagues, when I told him that about being almost kidnapped, I was so mad. I was so mad when I was complaining to him. And he said, but there's no actual law that prevents you from driving. I'm like, what? There's no law that prevents me from driving? But this and that. He said, no, I'll send you the traffic police code. And I go through it. I remember I couldn't sleep that night. I read it like 20 times. I'm like, oh my God, there is no specification for the gender because there is condition to get a driver license. It doesn't say a man or a woman. That was so empowering to start the movement for June 17, where we started a Facebook page and we called for women to drive on that day, June 17. That will lead to this. It's a long story,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, and there's a lot of detail. And I do want to remind the audience, you have cards. If you have questions, please write them on the card. Folks will come around to collect them, and we're going to try to fit in some audience questions here toward the end. So as you say, that gets you into this 2011 period. At the same time, of course, there's a burgeoning of social media availability. You talked earlier about the internet and the role of the internet in sort of expanding the worldview. And so you decide, you have some friends who are in media, there's some interviews, and you're teed up, if you will, to get out there and drive. And you go with your brother and you do that, and what happens?
So I drove twice. The first time was because they said, oh, there will be men wolves in the street, rape you. There will be riot if you go drive. So we needed to encourage women to go and drive on June 17. And the only way to do it, to have a crazy person who takes the car, drive, prove, take a video, post it on YouTube. And that crazy person was me, and Wajiha Al-Huwaider. She's the first female woman rights activist in my country. She's an amazing woman. And she filmed me. It was just two girlfriends in a normal day driving in the city. And I told Wajiha, make sure you take the video shows the street names, the landmarks in Khobar city where I drove, which was a Rashid Mall. And we posted that on YouTube, which is YouTube. So why it's very important to know your audience. Saudi Arabia, when it comes to YouTube, we're #1 nation in the world in the consumption of video. watching videos per capita, 90 million video views per day in Saudi Arabia, and this is official number by YouTube themselves. When I posted it, it was the most viewed video that day. It was trending in Saudi Arabia and around the world, and I remember people watching it because it was trending. You know, when something is trending on YouTube, you go and watch it out of curiosity. A guy from Australia, he comments like, why everyone is watching this? It's just a woman driving. Exactly, and I was speaking Arabic, he had no clue. I feel bad for that Australian guy. But I think the world knew why everyone was watching that video. 2 days later, I asked my brother to drive again because I wanted to know the authority, what they think of women driving, what's gonna happen to women on June 17. And I asked him, on purpose, I want to pass by a police car, a traffic police car. So I made sure I have the eye contact at the traffic light, and we passed by the police car and he pulled us over, and he said, he was laughing. He's like, I have the video of that. Do you know that you are in Saudi, women don't drive? Are you from Saudi? I said, yes, I'm from Saudi. And there's nothing in the law that says women cannot drive. And he says, but you don't have a driver license. I said, I have a driver license. And I show him my American driver license. And I'm pretty sure the guy's like, who's this girl? But the problem happened when someone called the religious police. And in Saudi Arabia at that time, the religious police have the power to arrest. And when they came, things really got really nasty. We're dragged to the traffic police station, 6-hour interrogation. I signed the pledge and I let go. But what happened in that 6 hours, the whole Twitter couldn't stop talking about, they had this hashtag Free Manal. And it became like national news that night. Everyone was sitting at the TV to know what happened to the woman driver of Al Khubar. Thankfully, I was released. But for some reason, they came back to my house at 2 a.m. in Aramco, and they arrested me again. I was interrogated, and I was sent to jail. I have no clue why I was sent to jail, because there was no warrant. No one explained to me why I was being sent to the women's jail. And I remember when the lady was picking up the keys, the paper of my, to put me in jail was on her desk. And I glanced at the paper, and it says, the crime driving while female. I couldn't believe I read that. Of course, the news the next day came up with 5 other charges. But that, putting me in jail, it brought a lot of exposure to the movement. By the way, the movement is still going on. We didn't stop, and we will not stop until the first driver license is issued to a Saudi woman. But I think the international media exposure to the movement was really overwhelming, and I was released later on. My father had to go to the king, ask for pardon to pardon this woman driver. So it went really out of proportion. But June 17 continued. Women went out on June 17. It continued. The campaigning continued until this day. We're 2017, 6 years later. By the way, June 17 is in 2 days. I should do something really. I will be in New Hampshire. Oh my God, I should go to my driving school.
Well, that's perfect. That's
See
right.
Mr. Rasmus.
That's actually quite a nice closing out there. There is much more in terms of your story after that point, what happened, your departure eventually from Saudi. You just wrote in the New York Times this piece, which I encourage folks to read, regarding having a son who lives in Saudi from your first marriage and a son outside of Saudi who you had with your husband now, and their inability to even connect in person because of the laws. So, because we're short on time, I do want to jump ahead to just talk a little bit about, here we are, we have a Saudi 2030 vision.
Yes.
There has been this, this movement, as you say, the driver movement, but also there have been other things that have happened in society. There was a goal under the 2030 vision to have, I think it's 30%
Yes.
Women employment. Where do you see the arc, if you will, of change, and how do you think the driving issue has become a symbol of that?
So driving is not really what we want. It's to be recognized as full citizens in my country. It's to end the male guardianship. It's not to be called minor anymore. I want the government to name an age where I'm considered an adult in front of the law. that's really the I would say the underline of the movement. Driving is just, it really gets the attention. And once we get the attention, we pitch in the things we want to talk about. And I also think that driving is very important for the women themselves, because nothing emancipates women more than driving. I was reading about the book, The Wheels of Change, how women rode the bikes to freedom. And it talks about the suffragettes in the US, how they used the bikes, how it really revolutionized the way women are looking at themselves as independent women, as someone who is liberated and can and able to create change in her society and ask for her rights. And Susan Anthony says, nothing emancipates women more. I've never seen anything emancipate women more than riding a bike. Just remove the bike and put car. So this is what we use driving for. But with the Vision 2030, it's interesting to come from a country where 60% of us are under the age of 25, but we always had people in the leadership over the age of 70. Yes. King Abdullah, may he rest in peace, he was at the age of 90 when he passed away. So we had this gap, we had this misunderstanding between the leadership of the country and the majority of the country. 80% of us are under the age of 40. So we finally have leaders who are under the age of 80. One of them is the Deputy Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. And the man is really ambitious, and I respect that finally someone is shaking the ground and creating change. I hope it continues. And I'm in contact with most of the people who work on the 2030. And when they explain to me the things they're doing, I'm like, finally someone is taking the lead and creating change and understanding what we really need. To disconnect from the oil, dependency on the oil. He calls it addiction to oil, this is amazing, and tapping into the things that we couldn't tap for years because of adopting ultra-conservative views of Islam that hinder us as women to be fully, our potential to be fully used when it comes to the workforce. We're only 14%. There are more women college graduates in Saudi Arabia than men, but we are only 14% of the workforce.
Right.
To come with a vision that says we need more women in the workforce, this is to do two things. It's very dangerous in Saudi Arabia. One, to challenge the religious establishment that is against women working in public places or women working in certain jobs. That's I would say that's the hardest battle in Saudi Arabia, really, to challenge that. And the second thing, because of the oil prices going down, because of Aramco is going public next year, and because of a lot of unrest that's happening in Saudi Arabia, economists say if Saudi Arabia don't change the behavior when it comes to spending, don't fully involve women in the workforce, will go bankrupt in 4 years. So we have the economy on our side as women, and we also have the social media and the women who are highly educated, who wants to participate in their country. So when they go back home, she studies here and she goes back home, she finds a job that really meets her qualification. She doesn't accept to go and work. I know friends who are college degree who work as cashier because that was the only job she found. That's waste of talent, and that's waste of her education and also money. Right. Vision 2030 is very ambitious, and I hope it does create change for the youth because they are the future of the country.
So I do want folks, if you have the cards, please put them up so our folks can see that you have them. So let me just kind of loop back to my last question on this point, which is, you have this quote you gave, it sounds like maybe off the cuff, but that's really taken hold about, rain beginning with a single drop.
Yes.
and the power really of an individual and their choices to stand up to create change. And we have seen a sweep of change, obviously globally, but particularly in the Middle East, over this same time period that you had this personal experience of change. This is a huge question to ask, but where do you see signs of hope? You ended there with your comment about the millennial generation. Where do you see signs of hope for those who are seeking to change their society, and what would you encourage them to do to go about it?
Speak up. And never, never, never give up.
Yeah. Well, and you have lived that, you have certainly lived that out. Okay, so I'm not sure where the cards are. I think Bev has them, and we'll get a few audience questions in here before I know you need to go. Thank you, Bev. Thank you. Nope, thank you. I'm sure we won't. Okay, so we have several questions, it looks like, on the ideas around education, as we talked about, and its role for you. You did leave, you left Saudi to work for a while in the United States. Are there differences that you've seen in how education has played a role for women in the different experiences you've had, both over your time between the US and Saudi, but also now having lived outside of the kingdom? Are there differences you've seen in how women have been educated that have been helpful to them?
Yes, so education is a very dangerous tool. How? It could be constructive, it could be destructive. Yes, education can be destructive. If you teach one side of the story, and if you don't encourage critical thinking, and if you impose whatever I tell you is the truth, and do not ask, do not question, do not say why, that's very destructive education. We were brought up this way, unfortunately. Our education in the public school was this way. But when you move to the constructive education that encourage the freedom of thinking, the freedom of speech, that encourage the critical thinking and also questioning why. You can even ask your own teacher why this is it. This is the constructive education. Something else, the education doesn't only happen with academic certificate. Education happens in the media, in the social media, our homes, moms and their kids. That all go to the same river, which is the awareness, bringing awareness to women. And also the education that we seek ourselves. Most of us are lazy, we just wait for information to come our way. But to have this, I would say, thirst to seek the truth. So I've been told something, I have to question it. Mm-hmm. I have to ask. This is part of education. This is how do you educate yourself? And if I didn't question the rules, I would have not tried to change them. And it's a very, I would say, not only for women, it emancipate everyone. It liberates everyone when you have this. Don't close your mind. Always be open to new ideas. Always be open to even the opposite opinion and the things that you don't believe, because that's the only way to learn, really.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple questions in here that get very much to this point of, why is it that you think in the society that you grew up in and in other societies, there's such a fear of women having a voice? And if I can tack onto that another question, which is, when you talk to your children, how do you talk about this issue and extremism in general?
These are two totally different, I would say, the extremism and the
role of women.
The role of women.
Why is there this fear of women having a voice and having a...
I think fear of women is a global issue. Mm-hmm. Let's agree on that. Fear of women in the power is a global issue.
We can agree on that.
Yes. And women are so powerful, they just don't know that yet. Women can change the world. If there are women leaders only, believe me, there will be no wars. There will be peace. I'll just be in the salon doing my nails and having fun, and the men were just like, let's go and fight, let's go. Like, let's just take things peacefully, let's take things. This is us women. We try to bring people together, while men try to push away from each other, creating us and them. I think women's role in this world, in the change, is vital, because women teach their kids. Women are the one who really have, behind every successful man there is a woman. Mm-hmm. Behind every successful woman are successful women, mm-hmm. that push her to success. This is the power of women. And the fear, as I said, is a global thing, but also the fear from women, because people are usually afraid of what they don't know. We never experience having women in the top power. I'm talking about my culture or my society, because in Europe and here you have women on top of the political system. They haven't experienced that yet. Until the day they experience that, I think then their idea of having women in power positions or having women, until this day we didn't have women officials. We don't have women ministers. Until that day comes and the change happens to the better, I think that fear of women being there in the power positions will change, will be more enthusiasm to have more women in power positions.
So talk a little bit about this idea then of now you turn around and you talk to your sons.
Yes.
How do you talk to them about this issue and then again, generally speaking, extremism?
I mentioned this before. It was actually yesterday. When women were fighting for the right to vote in the US, and there was tie in the voting, and there was one man who could change the course of history in the US. That one vote could give the woman the right to vote in the US or not. His mom sent him a message, and she said, vote yes for women voting. That mom is very important. That mom could be any one of us that can influence her own kids' decisions to be more pro-women rights and advocate for women's rights.
And to be more open, I would assume more generally to your point about fearing what you don't
The extremism. I think extremism, personal story, that when you corner someone and make them the enemy, it could lead them to extremism. And I think this is what's happening in the West today. There has been cornering, there's been accusation, there has been Islamophobia, there has been a lot of attack against Muslims. And I'm not proud to see people who are in power who've said very harmful things against 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. That creates isolation, that creates us and them, that corners them, and that leads to the youth to go to radicalization. So it's not only from within, it comes also from all the challenges that you face around you. And the other extremism is when you don't encourage open dialogue, when you don't encourage accepting the other and coexisting, when we always prejudice and we don't want to listen to the other. And it's interesting because I have friends who are pro-Trump and friends who are pro-Clinton. And when it was happening, the presidency election in the US, I've seen my friends who are pro-Trump being shut down, being called stupid because they don't understand. And I'm like, how are you going to create change if you don't listen to the other? No matter your political beliefs, no matter what you think of the other people believe, you have to encourage open dialogue. You have to listen to them. You have to understand their pain to be able to create a better future. And that would actually really create extremism. Sometimes we are extremists and we don't know that yet. We don't know what extreme until something hits us. And I'm like, oh my God, what went wrong? Because you didn't listen. You were not open. You were very prejudiced about your beliefs.
Yep.
Yes.
Final question, which is coming back to the issue of driving, and that is, how would women being allowed to drive change the culture of Saudi Arabia? And then many urban women are used to the luxury lifestyle of having drivers in Saudi Arabia. Luxury. Do you think they would be receptive to this change?
I cannot speak on behalf of women, but I can speak on behalf of myself. I do find driving is the key to change in Saudi because women will not be dependent on another man to drive her around. This is a given for me. And I do believe once women start driving, that will be the end of the guardianship system, which is, I call it the source of all evil in my country. Please follow the campaign, I Am My Own Guardian, or Stop Enslaving Saudi Women, that's the campaign. I do believe the driving issue is one of the most challenging issues in Saudi Arabia because once it comes to the service, a lot of things opened with that. We're the last country on earth where women don't drive. We need to finish with this. We need to end it. Whether it's a luxury or not luxury, it wasn't a luxury to me. I was a single mom. I couldn't have a driver living with me in the house. That's not a luxury to me. And it's not even luxury to the drivers themselves. We had a driver yesterday with us the whole day, and I felt bad. And I told Erin, my publicist, and I said, do you know this is the drivers in Saudi Arabia? He spent the whole day with us, driving us around. That's even inhuman to them. Not every woman can afford driver. I know a lot of my girlfriends who drop offers for jobs because she would pay her salary to the taxi. 80% of Uber started 2 years ago in Saudi Arabia, I think 2 years ago. 80% of their customers are women. That tells you something. Mm-hmm. We need to change this. We need to stop an issue that's been, we're talking about it since 1990. That's 28 years, right? Period.
It's a great way to end the discussion
thank you.
here.
Thank you, everyone.
I want to tell folks before you start clapping, I want to tell you that Manal has to leave for the airport. There are pre-signed books. She has pre-signed some copies of the books that are right outside the door. But please join me in a round of applause to thank Manal Al-Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you.